Hi, I'm Mrs. Sullivan. Today we're learning about history things. France under Louis the XIV, the Civ. Louis the Civ. Henry Ivy, what happened to the X? Restores order. In the late 1500s, France was torn apart by turbulent wars of religion. A century later, France was a strong, unified nation-state ruled by the most powerful monarch in Europe. Religious strife. From the 1560s to the 1590s, religious wars between the Catholic majority and French Protestants called Huguenots. I can't do this anymore. I'm not Miss Sullivan, so I need to go get her. Enjoy this? Hey, man.
John, did you tell him anything?
Need help.
Hi, guys. Sorry about that. I told him not to play with the camera on my laptop, but I guess he didn't listen.
You're mean.
Anyways, I don't know what he told you, but I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay, so today we're talking about France. And just like yesterday we talked about an absolute monarch in Spain, today we're talking about somebody who had absolute power but in France. So we're going to start with Louis the 14th. You got that part, right? The 14th? Okay, so those Roman numerals right there, XIV, that's the 14th. X is 10, V is 5, and the 1 in front of the 5 means 5 minus 1, so 14. So, before we can talk about Louis, though, we're going to talk about Henry. So Henry IV and his restoration of order to France. So, there was some serious religious strife going on in France in the 1560s to the 1590s. So when Spain was having their golden age and England was having a pretty decent golden age under Queen Elizabeth, France was torn apart by religious struggle. So the biggest struggle was between the Catholics, who were in the majority, and the French Protestants, also known as the Huguenots. And they were the minority. So I'll write that down because that's big. The Catholics versus the Huguenots. And Huguenots are, they're Protestants. That's all they are. They're French Protestants. They're Protestants who are in France. But they're called specifically Huguenots. The worst incident happened on a holiday, a Catholic holiday called St. Bartholomew's Day, August 24th, 1572. While Huguenot and Catholic nobles were gathered for a royal wedding, so big party, a plot by Catholic royals led to the massacre and the slaughter of 3,000 Huguenots. In the next few days, thousands more were slaughtered. For many, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre symbolized the complete breakdown of order in France. If your king can't prevent one faction from massacring another, your country's practically at civil war, and that's not okay. So, in 1589, a Huguenot prince, a Protestant, inherited the French throne and took the name Henry IV. For 4 years, Henry fought against fierce Catholic oppression to gain control of France. So he's not really, so even though he's king, he doesn't have full control. Finally, to end the conflict, he had to convert to Catholicism. He said, Paris is well worth a mass, basically saying, Protestant, Catholic, we're worshiping the same God. I would rather be in control of this country and be Catholic than stay Protestant. So then, to protect Protestants, though, in 1598, he issues the Edict of Nantes. Okay, so 1598, Edict of Nantes. And this is a really big deal because the Edict of Nantes granted the Huguenot religious toleration and other freedoms. So it said that nobody can persecute you for being Protestant. So, big deal. Henry IV then set out to repair France because France has been torn apart by 30 years of religious war. His goal, he said, was not the victory of one sect over the other, but a chicken in every pot, basically saying everybody has enough food on the table. Under Henry, the government reached into every area of French life. Royal officials administered justice, improved roads, they built bridges, they revived agricultures. By building the royal bureaucracy and reducing the influence of nobles, Henry IV laid the foundations on which future French monarchs would build absolute power. So he builds up the power of the monarchy, but he does it by trying to help out everybody and increase like a bureaucracy, so increase the governmental power and decrease the influence of specific nobles. So then you have this guy, Cardinal Richelieu. When Henry IV was killed by an assassin in 1610, his 9-year-old son, Louis XIII, became king. But a 9-year-old can't really rule. So for a time, the nobles were able to reassert their power, and it was more the nobility who was in charge of France. Then, in 1624, Louis appointed Cardinal Richelieu as his chief minister. And then Richelieu spent the next 18 years increasing control of the central government. Okay, so this is under Louis XIII. So you've got Cardinal Richelieu, and that's French, so I'm going to have to look how to spell it. Chelieu. So, some things that he did. Richelieu sought to destroy the power of both the Huguenots and the nobles, two groups that did not usually bow to royal authority. Although he allowed the Huguenots to practice their religion, he smashed down their walled cities, he outlawed their armies, and he also defeated the private armies of the nobles and destroyed their fortified castles. So, think about it. Before this, France was more of a realm of city-states than anything else. The king was in charge of Paris, but that was about it. Everywhere else in the country, the nobles had their own castle, they had their own walls, they had their own army. The Huguenots had their own castles, they had their own walls, they had their own army. So the king isn't really in charge of all of France, right? He's just in charge of his part, and his part happens to have the most money, so the rest of them kind of have to obey, but they all have their own armies, so they don't have to if they don't want to. Richelieu wants to change all that. Okay, Richelieu wants to make everybody part of French power. So he smashes the Huguenot and the noble resistance. He also tied the nobles to the king by giving them high posts in the royal army. So he basically says, your job now depends on the king. Richelieu also handpicked his successor. And so Louis XIII, who had inherited the throne when he was 9 years old, died and left the throne to his 5-year-old son, Louis XIV. And so Richelieu put another cardinal in place who was going to extend royal power as well, Cardinal Mazarin. Mazarin. I'm not really sure how the French pronunciation would go. Someone can correct me on that if you speak French. Okay, so Richelieu strengthened royal authority by destroying the Huguenot and the noble armies and their independence, and wants to keep building this power. So then you have this absolute monarch. So soon after Louis XIV becomes king, as you may expect, you have a bit of disorder. So that's 13, that's 14. Because it's a 5-year-old on the throne of France, right? In an uprising called the Fronde, nobles, merchants, peasants, and the urban poor each rebelled in order to protest royal power and preserve their own power. On one occasion, rioters even drove the boy king out of his palace. It was an experience that Louis would never forget. And so when he turned 23 and his cardinal, his helper Mazarin, died, he said, I have been pleased to entrust my affairs of government to the cardinal, so I've been okay letting him do it. But now it is time I govern myself. So first you've got the Fronde uprising. And then he says, no, that's not happening again. I'm going to take over. So he says, I am the state. Like his great-grandfather, Philip II of Spain, because remember, they're all marrying each other for alliances, so everybody's related to everybody. So the King of France, his great-grandfather, was the King of Spain, who was Philip II, who we talked about yesterday. They're related. Louis firmly believed in his divine right to rule. He took the sun as the symbol of his absolute power. Just as the sun stood at the center of the solar system, he said the Sun King stands at the center of the nation. So he's known as the Sun King. And that's his big nickname. If you ever hear of the Sun King, they're talking about Louis XIV. During his reign, he did not once, call a meeting of the Estates General, which was the French medieval council, made up of representatives from all of the French social classes. So it's kind of like Parliament, kind of like Congress. But the Estates General did not meet for over 160 years. Now, if the president refused to ever confer with Congress on anything, let's say we didn't have a constitution, okay? And the president could choose whether or not he was going to use the input of Congress, who's supposed to represent the people. If the president refused to ever ask Congress for anything, then he has all the power himself, right? That's what Louis was doing. He was refusing to call the Estates General, refusing to let them check his power, and making all the decisions himself. So, then he's strengthening royal power as well. He spent many hours each day attending to government affairs. To strengthen the state, he followed the policies of Richelieu. He's expanding the bureaucracy. He's appointing intendants. Okay? Intendants are royal officials who collect taxes, recruit soldiers, and carry out his policies. Okay, these and other government jobs often went to your wealthy middle class, so not necessarily your upper class. In this way, he cemented his ties with the middle class. The middle class supported him because he kept giving them jobs, right? You like people that give you jobs. It's a way to survive. The king also built the French army into the strongest in Europe. The state paid, fed, trained, and supplies 300,000 soldiers. So he built up this army and used it to enforce his policies both at home and abroad. So he used his army on his own people. So, strong army. Now, let's talk about Colbert. Not Stephen Colbert, like the Colbert Show, but Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the finance minister of Louis. He imposed mercantilist policies. So remember mercantilism being you put your value on silver and gold. He had new lands cleared for farming, encouraged mining, other basic industries, built up luxury trade to protect French manufacturers. He put these really high tariffs. Remember, your tariffs are your taxes on imported goods. So you don't want to buy things for England anymore because they're expensive. You want to buy things from France and support French economy. So Colbert puts these high tariffs on imported goods. He fosters overseas colonies. It's under Colbert and Louis that New France finally starts getting going, right? Remember last chapter we talked about how New France wasn't really nearly as profitable as New Spain because they weren't putting as much effort into it. This is where that changes. Colbert's policies helped make France the wealthiest state in Europe. But the issue is Louis keeps spending money. Waging wars cost money. Also, building his palace, which we're going to talk about next, costs money. So, Versailles. Versailles. The Palace of Versailles in Paris. It's on my bucket list to go. I went to Paris once, didn't get to go to Versailles. I was really upset about it, so I want to go back. It is one of the grandest palaces in Europe. He turned a royal hunting lodge into this immense Palace of Versailles. Whenever you hear about the Treaty of Versailles, which ends the, that was the Treaty of Paris. There's several treaties of Versailles that are going to be coming up. They're all signed here at this palace because it's so honking big and so pretty and so expansive that it's a great place for foreign dignitaries to meet. So, but this is the guy that built it, the Sun King, Louis XIV. He spared no expense into making it the most magnificent building in all of Europe. Its halls and salons displayed the finest paintings, statues. This thing is dripping with artwork. Chandeliers, mirrors, flowers, trees, fountains, all set out in patterns. Google the Gardens of Versailles. They're insane. In fact, Google the Gardens of Versailles, or the Palace of Versailles, pick a picture, email it to me. I'll give you extra credit because you're watching the video. So, again, like I said, find a picture of Versailles or the Gardens of Versailles. Be appropriately impressed. Send me the picture. I'll give you extra credit. Versailles becomes the perfect symbol of the Sun King's wealth and power at both the king's home and the seat of government. It houses nobles, officials, servants. People live there. He also conducts court ceremonies there. So he's got this guy is just all about himself. Okay? He perfects these elaborate ceremonies that emphasize how important he is. Each day begins in the king's bedroom with this major ritual known as the levee, or the rising. Yeah. High-ranking nobles competed for the honor of holding the royal wash basin, handing the king his shoes, which had diamonds on the buckle. At night, the ceremony was repeated in reverse. Wives of the nobles fought to attend on women of the noble family. Okay, so you've got your levee, which is your rising ceremony. How ornate is that? And then other ceremonies. Rituals such as the levee served a serious purpose. French nobles were descendants of the feudal lords, and the feudal lords used to be the ones in power. At liberty on their estates, the nobles were a threat to the power of the monarchy. By luring the nobles to Versailles, by getting them to want to come to attend him, Louis turned them into courtiers angling for privileges rather than rival warriors battling for power. So he left them exempt from paying taxes. So he gave them things so that they wouldn't want to. So he didn't make them pay taxes, which means they're not getting money from the nobles, which means they're increasing taxes on the poor, which the poor doesn't like. But he's securing the support from the nobility so the nobility doesn't rise against them. This is an excellent short-term plan. It's a very bad long-term plan. And we'll get to that in the next couple chapters, how this kind of backfires on all of France. But while this is happening, the king and his court supported a splendid century of the arts. The age of Louis XIV came to be known as the classical age of French drama. You've got painting, music, architecture. Louis XIV is actually one of the guys who helped create ballet into what it is today. Before this, ballet didn't really exist. Ballet is sort of born after things in Louis XIV's court. So for those of you that love ballet so much, he's who you can thank. He was quite the adept dancer himself. And so as a leading patron of culture, Louis sponsored French academies, arts, sciences, learning. It was all big. But it doesn't last long. It lasts long, it doesn't last forever. Louis rules for 72 years. Now remember, he came to power when he was 5, but still, 72 years. That means he lives until he's 77. Pretty darn good. But here's what's happening, and here's what's causing French prosperity to erode. 1, costly wars. Wars are expensive, and he kept fighting them against his own people, against other people. Rival rulers joined forces basically to stop France because Louis was becoming so powerful. The Dutch and the English fought to maintain a balance of power to prevent any one country, France, from dominating all by itself. In 1700, when Louis finally passed away, it wasn't his son that inherited, it was his grandson, Philip V. His son did inherit, but his son was pretty old. In 1700, his grandson, Philip V, because remember they send their children off to other countries to get married, Philip V becomes king of Spain. So he lives long enough to see his grandson become king of another country. To maintain the balance of power, neighboring nations led by England fought to prevent the union of France and Spain. Think about it. Louis, his grandson Philip, if they buddy up together, you've got the might of Spain and the might of France together. That's not good for England or the Netherlands or any of the other countries. Keep in mind that both countries are very Catholic too, so if they buddied up, they would be able to force all of the rest of Europe to be Catholic. And so you have this war, the War of Spanish Succession, which drags on until 1713, when finally France signs a Treaty of Utrecht, which is in the Netherlands now. And Philip remained on the Spanish throne, but France agreed never to unite the two nations. Okay, so you have your War of Spanish Succession, which lasts from 1700 to 1713. It's long. So Philip V gets to be king of Spain, but they're not allowed to unite the power of France and Spain. And then finally the Huguenots. Louis saw France's Protestant minority as a threat, and so the poor Huguenots, who got like 50 years of peace, in 1685 he revoked the Edict of Nantes. So that's a big deal. Now there's no more religious protection for French Protestants. So he revokes the Edict of Nantes. Nantes, by the way, is a French city. More than 100,000 Huguenots flee France, settling mainly in England, the Netherlands, Germany, Poland, and the Americas. The Huguenots have been among the hardest working and most prosperous of Louis' subjects. So actually, much like when Spain kicked the Muslims and the Jews out, it hurt their economy. When France kicked the Huguenots out, it hurt their economy. So there you go. So ultimately, again, he creates this golden age, but it's a golden age that isn't set up to last. It's a golden age that's only set up to serve him. And that's what makes it so difficult, okay? So you have your Junopod. There's a primary source or two in there for you to read about kind of what life was like, really to think about what life was like for everybody that wasn't royalty and how that might have compared to the people that were. And then tomorrow we'll move on and we'll talk about England and what's happening in England at the time. Okay? So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.